What is the meaning of life? And what does the latest science and philosophy tell us about this? This has led me to come up with something I've called the illusion of meaning. And don't worry if that doesn't mean anything to you just now. You can check out the original video, but it's all fully explained in today's podcast episode, where I was joined by Maria Briggs. Maria was interested in some of these ideas, so I thought it'd be fun to have a conversation, and it certainly was. And we were able to also take into consideration some of the points that were brought up on that original video. As I said, it doesn't matter if you've seen that. This podcast episode stands alone. Hello and welcome to the podcast episode for The Illusion of Meaning. And I'm really excited to say that we have Maria Briggs who's joined us today.
Hello.
And hello, Maria, actually, do you want to just introduce yourself, tell us about what you've done and what you're doing as well?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, I'm Maria. I've been writing on Substack now for a few months. Came across Dr. Chris Earle's work and just kind of got quite curious about the philosophy side of things. So I write a lot about science. And I also have a background in teaching as well. So I was kind of coming to Substack from my science writing and trying to connect with other science writers, but actually found the philosophy sort of science crossover really interesting. So I'm here to have this conversation as kind of a newbie. I don't really know very much about philosophy. I have found it in the past to be a bit kind of heavy to get into with a lot of jargon. And so that's kind of how we got talking. And so I'll hopefully be able to share a few things and ask questions that maybe you might also have. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was great. Yeah, and I should introduce myself. So I did an undergraduate degree in molecular biology. I think, Maria, you were biology. Is that right?
Yes, like straight biology.
Yeah. And then after that, I did mostly sort of microbiology stuff, technically molecular microbiology. But I've always been much more interested in the deeper philosophical implications of science, the biggest questions about the nature of existence and the nature of our place in the universe. So yeah, I thought we could just really get stuck in. There's an original article called The Illusion of Meaning and a YouTube video as well. So check those out. And I'm going to put everything in the description below the video. So any interesting things that come up, I'll put them in there. And I'll put a link to Maria's Substack and things in there as well, so you can find Maria's work. In terms of the illusion of meaning, the idea is that with the scientific revolution, which starts around 1500s, it's not actually that long ago in the grand scheme of things. Science uncovers things about reality that come as somewhat of a surprise. So it shatters an illusion, or it shatters a perception that we humans had about our place in the universe. So Nicholas Copernicus showed that the Earth revolves around the sun. And at that time, there were some ideas that the Earth was at the very center of the entire cosmos. Copernicus wasn't the originator of that idea. There were Greek thinkers that had suggested the same stuff, but Copernicus was starting to provide scientific evidence behind it. So it's the humanity decentering. So rather than us being at the center of this vast cosmic arena, we are just, and now we know in the present day, just how many galaxies there are and the vastness of space. So not only are we not at the center of the cosmos, we're tiny, tiny part on an ever-expanding, enormous cosmic stage. And then the next big decentering moment was probably the Darwinian revolution, which showed that humans, rather having a privileged place in the natural world, could instead be seen as part of the natural world, and famously on the ape branch of the tree of life, which caused a lot of controversy for some people. But I feel like those revolutions have been pretty well disseminated into our wider society. So one of the points I like to make as part of this illusion of meaning is to talk about the illusion that was shattered in the 20th century, one that was much more gradual. And because it was gradual, it went a little bit unnoticed, which is the realization that when they look at life on the atomic and molecular level, all life, you and I, we are made up of the same atoms, the same matter as the rest of the physical universe. And a short aside, there's also things like dark matter, but we'll put that to the side. But what's the point there is, although we feel separate from the universe, we are the universe. And some people are familiar with that because Carl Sagan, was the one that popularized this idea that we are star stuff. And he tells us this because the atoms that make us up were forged inside stars, big nuclear fusion reactors. So the illusion that we are separate from the universe is shattered, but it's not led to the same sort of transformation in our human understanding of what we are and who we are. So yeah, that's the rough idea of the illusion of meaning.
It's interesting because there's this quality that, like, the more you understand the nuts and bolts of how it works, some people see that as more magical and interesting and adds like a level of richness. And others see it as, oh, we're just a machine, we're just a bunch of cogs that join together. And does that actually somehow invalidate meaning or our thoughts or our feelings? So it kind of branches, it can go either way. That kind of revolution you talk about, where you're understanding the molecular nature of life. I mean, you look at like Darwin and you look back in time and you can see people were either persecuted or they were like mocked in the papers and stuff when they came out with these radical theories that eventually were shown, mainly thought to be true, by the modern day at least. I don't think we've seen that either with like understanding the molecular world, and it's certainly more in the public attention, but I don't think it's been necessarily, those questions have been discussed in like public discourse the way that it was with, say, Darwin or Copernicus.
And yeah, and I think that's exactly it. For me, we're still talking about Darwin.
Yeah.
We're still questioning the wording of certain passages of The Origin of Species and seeing if that indicated that Charles Darwin may have harbored some sort of religious belief or something like that. Now, there is a lot of scholarship that can be done on that, and it's valid, but there's been 160 years of science done since, and it's incredible. So that's one of my, kind of motivations. I want to share the advancements that have happened since then. I want to continue to move it forward a little bit. And then the other thing you said, which I think is really important, was on the one hand, you can see this as a beautiful thing that we are star stuff. I know that resonates with a lot of people. They find that really, really beautiful. And it's just because stars are beautiful, but maybe there's an understandable human affinity with things like stars and the sun and the heat and stuff. So I think it's something that feels very, very organic. It's a connection that's very deep seated in us, and it's one that people find easy to make. But on the other hand, you can have this idea of, so if we're just working according to the laws of physics, we could be seen as almost like a machine or something like that. And so again, what seems like sudden revolutions in science tend to be, when you look at the history, a lot more gradual. And so this idea of us having, thinking about humans in physical terms. So when I say physical terms, I mean like physics, like we are physics. And then we can go to the French scientist There's a guy called De La Metre, and he wrote a book called Man the Machine. And there's some incredible passages in that. And this is, I don't know, 100 years before the origin of species, where he says, man is made of matter, the same as everything else. And he was quite an incredible guy that seemed to be quite a bit ahead of his time. But yeah, so the idea of man and machine then is kind of like after Isaac Newton showed how you could use mathematics to understand the movement of planets and stars, and also how forces act on objects. So basically mechanics, how things move, how forces work. And for De La Metre, he was saying, well, if you think about the way the human arm moves, you can apply classical Newtonian mechanics to describe the way it moves. And I think there was even a comment somewhere that I saw where they were talking about, the heart is a pump, it's a machine. Surely, because I've challenged this idea of the machine, or at least the value of it, and being more cautious about how we use it to describe life. But the heart could be thought of as a pump. So you can think of, the heart is this mechanical pump. The problem comes, I think, when we we can describe aspects of our biology in those mechanical terms. It makes sense to understand how our skeleton moves, how our muscles work in terms of forces, and that's reasonable. The problem comes when people say, well, then humans are a machine. You've got to think about the use of the word machine, because machines are man-made things. So it's an interesting point that these are usually very staunch physicalists, hyper-rational kind of people, or people who would like to see themselves as hyper-rational, describing humans as a machine. But I actually think there's a problem there, because, well, machines are intelligently designed. So I don't think it's a great word to use to describe naturally occurring life forms, comparing it directly with something that's intelligently designed. And of course, they would say, it's a metaphor. I know that it's not an actual machine. It's just that it pretty much is. You can see already the problem. It's obscure. It's not you need clarity when we're describing things. And it's actually causing more obscurity than clarity. The reason that life isn't a machine is that life as a property of matter, as far as we know, is probably the most interesting thing that can exist in the universe. It's matter that constructs itself. So if you think of the first cells, somehow the matter, through a source of energy and chemistry, somehow finds a way to construct itself and then copy itself so that it could make another configuration of matter that resembles the first one, reproduction or replication. That is probably, for me, one of the most special things about life that separates it from the other forms of matter. It's when things are starting to do things like that, self-construct, reproduce, then I don't think we're just talking about chemistry. I think then we're talking about something that we would call biology. And so for me, that's a core principle of what life is, and a dominant characteristic. And machines certainly don't do that. So straight away, by calling it a machine, you strip it of the most important thing that it does.
So as you're essentially saying, we have never designed self-replicating machines. So therefore, we are not a machine because we don't know of any machine that can do that.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And that was the work of the mathematician John von Neumann in the 1950s and 60s. He was trying to provide a mathematical logic in order to think about how we might make self-reproducing machines. So he was working away on that. And it's his work that's kind of the foundation for this alternative perspective that I'm taking. because then when he does that work, you instead have to think about how the informational part and the constructor part, the thing that the organism, the cell that constructs itself, you start to give a more appropriate weighting to these essential features of life. And so his work was really important for that. And then the idea later in the 70s and 80s was, if the universe is so large, as we spoke about, and so the distances are just unfathomable, and it would take multiple human lifetimes for us to travel to the nearest other galaxy, then the only way that we could essentially ever effectively explore the universe is through machines that can travel those distances. And John von Neumann and other people correctly pointed out, well, if you made a machine that was supposed to last for long enough to do that, the chances are it would be destroyed, or it would degenerate and it would degrade to the point where it wasn't functional. So for them, the idea was to create a self-reproducing machine that could land on multiple different planets or moons, collects from basic resources, and replicate. And that's actually a crucial point about biology, is that for persistence, and life has existed on this planet for 4 billion years. If it was a single organism at the start that had to last that whole time, it would be impossible. Something would go wrong and it would die. But it's the capacity to replicate and reproduce that on a sort of higher level adds a different level of stability and persistence. And those are crucial properties when we're thinking about evolution. So yeah, it's all very nuanced. And the problem is that as soon as you say that we need to think about more than just evolution and genetics, straight away people think that, oh no, like, so you don't believe in Darwin then, and then you get into all these additional arguments. No, scientists are continuing to understand evolution. They're continually trying to refine how they philosophically and theoretically understand it, but also practical. There's practical science now. So there was a couple of comments on the previous video debating whether evolution happens. No. Evolution in its most basic form is change over time. There's absolutely no doubt about it. What we're trying to understand is the mechanisms by which it happens, and maybe what factors are involved. The whole thing about this community that we're trying to have here, where we can have discussions about this, is nuance. And I do think that certain times on the internet, you can struggle to have nuanced conversations. There is that polarization. People want a hot take. The reality is, in the 160 years since Darwin, a lot's changed. It doesn't, And yeah, I think people just get a little bit defensive. One of the things that's not often spoken about the origins of species in Darwin is the Britishness of it. British people I'm from Britain, you're from Britain. British people are incredibly proud of Charles Darwin. I think he's buried at Westminster. So he's in the government buildings, like as a national hero.
Yeah. You can visit his house as well.
Oh.
And yeah, you can go and visit where he lived with his wife and children, and where he did a lot of his work. And they've got it set up. So like they've got his study set up, how they think that it might have been, and you can see his gardens. So he did a lot of studies on insects and plants. He had this big greenhouse. And it's like really quaint and lovely, but also it's really a place where a ton of serious science was done, and something that was really controversial at the time. It's a good trip.
You've been then?
Yeah.
You've actually been, yeah.
Yeah, I actually worked there on a project, I think, years ago it was, but it was great. So they look after it like a museum essentially, and it's open to the public. You just get tickets and you can visit.
Yeah. And so they've preserved it almost so it looks the way it would have when he lived there and stuff.
He's got the original library and everything. It's amazing.
Wow. That is incredible. And actually, you've just touched on something really important there. Charles Darwin did a lot of data collection and work. You know, he was a practical scientist. He wasn't just a theoretician. He wasn't just thinking. He did a lot of thinking, obviously, deserves credit, a huge amount of credit for that. But he was a practical scientist and he was continually doing these experiments with samples and things. And actually, the one other thing is he suffered from chronic illness, which I'm sure they probably talked about on the thing. He had to spend, days at a time in bed. And they think maybe he contracted malaria on one of his expeditions over the world. And you see that in his letters. I guess they have some of his letters and things there because he wrote to people all the time.
Yeah, I can't remember. It was so long ago, but they've definitely got a lot of his work there. But yeah.
Well,
I can't
actually,
remember.
Maria, what I was going to ask though is, you mentioned that different feeling, so is it a magical thing to think of us as stars? But then on the other hand, there is maybe a sort of confrontation there with a sort of very big universe, a scary big place. And it can induce sort of other feelings. What's your thoughts about all this stuff? How do you see that kind of thing from your perspective?
Kind of like, depending on the day, I see both, which
Yes.
is a weird place to be, but I definitely lean more toward finding meaning through the act of discovery and learning. Like, I have a real love of learning, and that in and of itself is meaningful to me. Like, it doesn't matter if it almost doesn't matter what it is, and it doesn't really matter the context. I always enjoy that process. So that's one element for me. But I think I find more meaning in human relationships and human interactions, even though I feel like a sense of awe when I look at the universe, or wonder, or I really enjoy and I find it meaningful to learn. True, like deep meaning, the things that mean the most to me are more to do with like the love that I have for my children, which is like something that you can't even describe or quantify. Or, over the years, I've helped so many children through teaching, and teenagers through teaching. And you're just getting like a little card from them at the end of the year saying that they love the lessons, or, sharing a story that, a memory that they have. Like, that is so much more meaningful than any feedback that I could get externally. So I definitely think that, although I've always loved science and it's a huge deal to me, it's the human relationships and my impact on others and vice versa that brings the most meaning. Like, even little things, like, so if someone, I remember one time someone said, "Oh, you really inspired me to do that." And I thought, wow, that's like, that means a lot to me to hear that, So yeah, but I do sometimes think about that kind of impersonal nature of the universe, and then it does feel kind of like scary in how incomprehensible it is, because for someone that likes to know information, you can't always know the answers, and that's like, that can be just disconcerting.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
I wanted to bring up one of the commenters on your YouTube video who shared something a little bit similar to this, I suppose. He sent a Einstein quote. So this is from Anatol Wegner, PhD. He sent through a quote from Einstein. It's quite long, but I just wanted to read like a few elements of it, because I think it really kind of encapsulates the joy and meaning through learning. So this is the Einstein quote. He said that a knowledge of the existence of something we cannot penetrate, of the manifestations of the profoundest reason and the most radiant beauty, which are only accessible to reason to us in their most elementary forms. It's this knowledge and this emotion that constitute the truly religious attitude. In this sense, and in this sense alone, I am a deeply religious man. And he goes on to say, it's enough for me, the mystery of the eternity of life, and that the meaning that he finds is in his endeavor to comprehend a portion. So he's accepting, I'm never gonna have all the answers, but there is meaning enough in the pursuit and in learning what I can of this world, of this universe. So I can't say that I always feel that way, but I do feel a sense of it.
It's a fantastic quote, and there's so many interesting things. You can see that idea of the beauty of nature, but there was also a kind of, there's a lot going on there, but almost like in a beauty in the mystery. So a beauty in the not knowing. So he's kind of reformulated that not knowing into a positive framing. You mentioned before how it
Yeah,
can be a little bit frustrating not knowing stuff, but he's saying, no, I want there to be mysteries because that's, and it's fun, isn't it? I mean, that
yeah,
makes it a pursuit that because we don't know the answers, what I'm trying to do with my work and what we're trying to do here is we have something to pursue. We have a process to follow. We don't know what we're going to find. And there's something so important about adopting curiosity as a mindset. It's a positive framing. I want to learn something new. It's a much better frame of mind to come into anything than I know everything or you can't teach me anything. So that's kind of something I wanted to encourage. And obviously, the comments that we've had have been really, really good. So you can see that curiosity. It's wonderful. It's
yeah,
really positive. But that's such a good thing for you mentally to have that curiosity, to have that mystery. The other thing that Einstein brought in there was this sort of humility, I just want to
yeah.
work on one like little tiny part of this, and that's enough for me. I enjoy the mystery. I just want to work on a tiny little sliver of that. And if I can make any progress, that's great. It's a great attitude, It's a really
Yeah.
good attitude.
It's
You come
realistic as
from,
well for a scientist who's like chipping away.
yeah. And when I say about curiosity, I know that some people get a bit frustrated with modern teaching stuff because teaching is now, which I know will annoy a lot of people, trying to be a much more supportive environment to the learner, which I know is a horrible thing. But no, it's the growth mindset that they're really encouraging kids to adopt. Is that
Yeah,
right to say? I mean, I've seen
yeah,
that in Scottish schools, but you were a
yeah,
teacher, so do
yeah.
you think that rings true for you? Is that the same as curiosity? And do kids actually pick that up? Are they starting to see it that way?
They kind of go hand in hand because, allow your curiosity to come out and to be like truly exploring things, you have to be prepared to accept that it's okay, that you're not always going to get a particular answer. You're going to come up against frustration or challenges or even like feelings within yourself that are sort of a barrier to you just enjoying that learning process. And encouraging the light growth mindset, I guess in my mind, is about helping children manage those barriers so that they can just let their natural love of learning come out. So yeah, they go hand in hand, like the growth mindset and the curiosity. Like, I think it's just really important to move away from like, we can't always have a bunch of success criteria that and we have to get to those, and those are the only criteria that we're trying to do in a particular lesson or in school. So um yeah, I could talk about teaching all day, but
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I love it. And just you were talking there about like criteria and stuff. And one of the things that I'm not saying there's an easy fix or anything, but testing is almost the opposite of,
mm,
you're supposed to adopt this growth mindset until you do a test. And it's like, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's right. And
yeah,
that's kind of so I think what I've found with sciencey people is because they've been at school, they've done all their exams, they've gone to university, they've done more exams, tests. That's right, that's wrong. Here's your mark. This is how well you've done metrics A, B, C, D, what your score is. By the time that they get into practicing science, say at a PhD level, there's a transformation that needs to occur
yeah, yeah,
because you need all the things you're saying, curiosity, not knowing. If you're in a mindset, the opposite mindset, that you know everything, I've always found, because I also did a lot of teaching with students in the lab and some classroom stuff as well with undergraduate students and things like that, and some assessments. But I found that the hardest thing to work with is the student that already knows. They already know everything, because then you can't, it's a huge barrier. It's a huge barrier, and it's hard to then help them. So even if they do know loads of stuff, because some of the students are unbelievable what they know, it make you laugh, the knowledge that some of them have. Even though they might know an unbelievable amount for their stage in their career, you kind of need them still to adopt that curiosity mindset that they might not know anything at all. Because
Yeah.
sometimes when I've seen those incredibly competent students, and sometimes if they're doing something wrong, you're like, there can be like really basic mistakes, really important ones, because we're always going to have blind spots when we're learning. We can't know everything.
Yeah.
But when you're overly confident, that can probably make it much harder to address those sorts of blind spots. Even the way that science is published and everything is still too much like, here's a right answer, here's a clear narrative about how this was done, this is the story. And what we're trying to do in science, in publishing of science, is stop telling really neat, tidy little stories, include all of the mess, include all of the contradictions, include all of the experiments that don't work, and give a richer, fuller picture. Because what actually is published in the journals, most scientists will tell you when you try and reproduce it or try and do it, it's harder than they make it look easy in the paper because of what they didn't tell you. A term that I used in The Illusion of Meaning, grand narrative, the idea of a grand narrative to the cosmos. And I'm saying that from my perspective as an atheist, because I still have to present as I am, and I want other people to come into this community and present as they are. So you don't have to present as an atheist if you're not. But at some point in the conversation, I have to go, right, I am an atheist. So for me, I don't have a grand narrative to the cosmos. The most famous example of a grand narrative would be a God, that there's something written into the nature of reality that is intelligible, human almost. And so scientists can get a little bit dogmatic and a little bit can attack those sorts of things. But narrative is a big thing within how we practice scientific research. It's always written as a narrative, as a paper at the end. What I think would make us better scientists is, instead of pointing out that person's irrational there because they're writing narratives, they're not describing reality as it is. They've written a narrative and now they're saying that narrative is what reality is. That does happen to an extent in science too. I'm not saying that they are equivalent. I am not saying that. And I think that's ultimately the point of all of what I'm doing. I think we need to go a step further than some of the sort of famous atheists and say, okay, yeah, humans are maybe irrational and they create meanings that may or may not be there. They may see significance in things that may not have the significance they think they have. Scientists have those same cognitive things going on too. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that they're equivalent, but we also need to be wary. A good scientist should take a step back and go, right, this is a bit absurd, but I'm a Homo sapien in the 21st century with a history of experiences that create cognitive biases. So I'm kind of going to lean towards this sort of explanation. So I need to be wary of that when I interpret this data. I don't know if you know Sam Harris. Sam Harris is another one of the sort of famous atheists in the around 2006 and stuff. They did a lot of talks and debated religious people. He comes from like a neuroscience background. He's interested in meditation and in Buddhism. He's done meditation retreats in India and things like that. He's written a book called, what was it again? Is it Waking Up? Forget the exact name, but it's, he accepts the term spiritual, and he thinks spiritual describes some of the things Einstein was saying in that quote from Anatole. Was it Anatole? Really great quote. A really great quote. I'd never heard that one before. It's a very spiritual quote. So
Yeah.
for Sam Harris, he's got no problem applying the word spirituality. I think spiritual is a good word to use. So as you can see, he's quite an open thinker. It's not necessarily that Sam Harris is so dogmatic that he can't bring in a word like spiritual into someone who's a secular atheist type. But the thing he doesn't do, because he has podcasts and things, the things I don't think he does well is to talk about him and his own cognitive starting point and how that colours the way he describes the world, because he's got some pretty strong opinions. And I think that that's the bit we should all do.
What you're saying as well is also based on assumptions. So if you're trying to, even in the design of a scientific experiment, also in interpretation, but very much like in the fabric of how it's designed, you have to ask what your assumptions are. And a lot of what you're saying on the philosophical side is also about kind of going back to basics and seeing what those fundamental assumptions are, whatever they might have been shaped by over your life. You're coming at any given question with a certain set of assumptions, and some of those might be like 100% factually a true thing. Other things maybe not. So I think that's a big factor as well.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And I think on that curiosity point, the fact is that your assumptions should be changing. They should be evolving with new information. And you think, oh, well, all scientists do that. No, they don't, unfortunately. And a large part of that is to recognize our fallibility as humans. And when you do that, then that applies to scientific investigations as well. It's not just something reserved for people with religious beliefs. And just on that religious thing that Einstein said, describing himself as a religious scientist, I think I would have to say I would do the same to describe myself as a religious scientist, because, and I have done years ago, I had a friend who was a really good friend. He's a Christian, and we used to have these discussions at length, really interesting. I saw the way that we both cared about existence and life and what things meant we shared that. That was the thing that we shared so much more than, and be clear, we have a completely different interpretation of the nature of reality.
Yeah.
But like, it is different. But the fact that we were both so enthusiastic to explore it together all the time, long chats, that's when I was like, I'm definitely a religious scientist. And it's that mystery. It's wanting answers. It's wanting to understand reality, all those things. The thing that really maybe separates me and my friend there, the one thing would be that no matter how compelling, no matter how comforting, and this is a personal thing, no matter how compelling, no matter how comforting, I want a framework or an exploration that's grounded in what's there. So even if you could say, well, there could be something else, I wouldn't score that highly for me. I would start with what we can see, what we can observe. So a lot of his beliefs, then I would start to depart from him. But that kind of enthusiasm for the thing, the motivation, the curiosity, the drive, that was something that I share with him and few others have in my life. Although on here and some of the other places where I've written or made little videos, I've met loads of people who really love all that stuff too,
Would you say then that's the main like a primary way in which you find meaning is considering yourself within the universe with the information that you have, um, and gaining meaning from simply knowing as much truth as you can.
Yeah, I think so. I think I do derive so much meaning from that. Um, it's probably my core one.
Right.
But, to be honest, though, at times becoming so disillusioned with science because real life is difficult and science is hard. It requires funding. There's a lot of pressures. And I know, Maria, you're wanting to explore that further as well in your own work
Yeah,
about.
it's just something that I've started writing about is it's that world and like the way that academic science is structured, especially in terms of allocation of funding, and like the day-to-day life of what it's like to be a scientist, to be kind of in there doing maybe the thing that you love most and gives you most value, but also maybe something that is really stressful and not the best work environment. I guess because it's a workplace as well. It's not, you don't do it for like, it's not just something that you're doing to volunteer. This is your place of work. And I think there, from what I've heard from other people and research and other things that I've found online, there does seem to be a big element of like poor culture in some areas in academia. And that's quite shocking to me because I just didn't think that it would be that way. But there have been some big reports out now by organizations that have looked into support for people that are struggling with mental health or stress levels, but also just the way the whole system works and how it creates, um, how it perhaps doesn't do anything to help the level of competition between researchers. And what you said about science telling a nice, neat little story, that's a good way of getting a grant, is to say, well, this might be the impact of my work, and it's a story I can predict with some success. But science doesn't always work that way, especially when it's something really radical. What about those studies? So yeah, it's a really fascinating world.
You've
Um,
nailed it. Sorry, just to say, because you've nailed that totally. And so that would be the thing. I've talked about the individual's cognitive biases, but what about that whole culture and structure where
yeah,
your whole lab's existence depends on getting more funding? So then how do you tolerate the inconvenient result? You're putting an
yeah,
immense amount of pressure on someone, their whole, not just their, so they'd be like a group leader leading this research, but they've got people under their employment with families and everything. Like if they don't get more money, they have to tell someone who's got maybe a young kid or that they're no longer going to have an income. And it can happen pretty suddenly. These are short-term contracts and grants,
yeah, like
five
a
years
few
is a very
years.
lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the instability of it all, um, and there's almost I feel like there is some assumption that you sort of have to like be married to the job in a way that is sometimes a little bit beyond reason. If you want to settle down, live in one place for a period of time because you have children and you want to just like not move around the country or have to travel internationally, or if you want to have some of those other things that may also be very valuable to you. I think sometimes scientists are in a position where they have to choose. They have to choose, they have to be careful. And I know everyone has to make difficult life choices. And this is not just a factor in science, but like you say, if you're on a contract that changes every 2 years, how do you make those decisions? That's really hard, and to what extent does, if you're settling down with a partner and when I say settling down, I really mean living with a partner, and or potentially choosing to have children, those seem to be like difficult barriers for people in science. And that just feels really unfair that they have to make that choice. Um, and that's sort of there's a system thing, isn't it? It's not one university saying you need to do this. It's how the system works. So yeah,
Yeah.
I've written a
And
couple of articles on it. Um, on affordability of just training to get the PhD, and then also like an overview of the culture as it stands in 2026. So yeah, but there have been big organizations that have looked into some of these systemic issues. So if you're interested, it'll be maybe in the bio.
I will. It will be.
Yeah.
No, it will go in the video description.
Yeah.
I will make sure. Don't worry. I won't take it back out or something. No, I've not read your one in detail on the affordability thing. I will read that. I'm enjoying this aside, so I'm just going to do it anyway. And I enjoyed your ones on climate change. I hadn't looked at some of like the numbers in a while. Some of the numbers and some of the calculations about different fuel types and impacts, and then how it relates to warming and everything. So I needed to read that. I hadn't read it in a long time. I was like, okay, a couple of things have changed a little bit,
Yeah.
Technological things and that. I'm going to jump straight into something. We'll talk about meaning and purpose and everything. I was reading about this El Niño event.
Yeah. It's in the news now, isn't it?
Yeah. There's an El Niño, which is, I'm going to do a very basic one, but it's to do with the temperatures of the water in the Pacific Ocean. And that has a knock-on effect to the entire world's weather system. And so these events happen at some regularity where there's a warming of the ocean and it increases extreme weather. But what's really something about this one is so that it will see this jump up, but in temperature, and it causes the extreme. But the problem is, because the global, I'm trying my best to do the hockey stick graph for the increase. That's not bad, I think.
No, that's not bad.
So the increase in temperature from pre-industrial times to today, and what's happening is that it's increasing. But the problem is, so there's been El Niños all the way along here, but now this El Niño, which will increase the temperature of the ocean, is already in a warmer world. So the jump up is to an even higher level. And what they said is in 1998, now this is the scary bit for me, that the comparison just did something for me. But they said that there was an El Niño event in 1998. And it was really quite extreme. And the scary thing was that boost in temperature from the El Niño, which was a noticeable event in 1998 with ramifications, but that increase in temperature was only to a point below our actual temperature now, it was something like that. It was I'll need to look. I'll put the link in the description to the article about it because it was really, really good. That's what to read to get the accurate information. There's still some level of uncertainty about the strength of this El Niño, as in how much the water temperature will increase. It's a prediction at this point in time, but it's a very confident one. But what I wanted to do was find some video clips, because those things we used to watch on the news when we were growing up, say in the year 2001, where they would say, this is what the temperature will be like in 2025. I want to now have a look at those back. I guess time seems to have gone so fast, especially with the COVID pandemic and what that did and how that affected the world and caused some sort of time dilation, that I feel like I've actually arrived 10 years. It's here. And I reading the thing about the El Niño was like that thing we were told about in 2001, 2002, by 2030, this, 2025, that. Yesterday I went, I'm actually here. And that was a bit of a shock.
That would be interesting to go back and read.
It's pretty scary stuff. Right, I might leave that in. I might not. It's a bit of an aside, but I'm enjoying the aside. We're going to
go so far off.
But that is fun to do.
This is what happens when you talk about philosophy.
Okay, so Maria was looking into something. I have no idea what it is that she wants to say just yet. So I'm looking forward to this to find out something a bit different something a bit unexpected. So, Maria, tell me what you were looking into this week as we think about what meaning is and how humans come up with meanings.
Yeah, I was thinking about this and I thought I could go and look at philosophers and ideas of people that are able to kind of just they've written down their ideas, they've expressed it, they're well studied. But I thought actually one of the areas where I find meaning is looking way into the past at people that maybe thought completely different to us or extremely similar to us. And I thought one of the spooky, kind of weird, meaningful things that I've seen are those, and I unfortunately haven't been able to see them in real life. It would be amazing to do this, but those cave paintings that you see from people like tens of thousands of years ago before writing. And in particular, the cave paintings that I find really resonate with me in a way that's kind of indescribable, really, is the ones where it's a handprint. And there's two ways of doing like a hand outline. You can dip your hand in paint and then stick it on the wall, or you can take pigment and put it in your mouth and you can use maybe like a hollow reed or a hollow bone or or not, and you can put your hand flat against the wall, blow the pigment out, and it will make an outline. And it's these outlines, sometimes they're called negative stencils. It's like a negative of your hand. Those are the ones that resonate the most. And I thought, why is that? Why even is it those particular ones and not the straight handprint ones that I just find like it just makes me say, wow. And I think it's because you get a really sharp outline with the negative stencil. It looks crystal clear, like that's a human hand. That was a person. And that kind of communication of personhood from someone so far back in time, that is like, it's like a human link. And I wonder if it's because I find a lot of like meaning in human connection, that it makes me wonder, what was that person thinking or feeling when they did that? They took the time to do that for some reason. Were they feeling a similar connection to us all those years ago, thinking, wow, I wonder who is going to see this in the future? What people in the future are going to look back and remember me, you know? And that's so hard to quantify. You can't necessarily, doesn't necessarily have like a value, but it does feel meaningful, at least to me. And I think especially these negative imprints, because there's all sorts of different cave paintings, but these negative imprints they especially resonate with me. And they've been known about for a long time now. You see them all over the world. It's amazing. But there was an article not too long ago, 2023, that kind of added to that story. So this is an article in New Scientist called Cave Paintings of Mutilated Hands Could Be a Stone Age Sign Language. This is by Alison George, March 2023. So in these particular paintings that these researchers are studying in France, they have the negative imprints, but they also have imprints that look like some of the digits are missing, or you can see like the first part of the finger, but then not the rest. And then you can see these at this one particular site, there's loads, and there's different ones with different fingers folded down. And then if you think about your 10 fingers and all the different combinations of finger patterns that you can do with those, we don't see a whole range of patterns. They see the fingers that are easier to hold up in the air. So like if I do this, that's easy. If I do this, that's easy, right? But it's harder to do certain configurations of your fingers. So what the researchers were saying was there's an argument to say that these finger patterns are perhaps they're not because somebody lost a digit. Perhaps they're actually a form of hand sign language. Perhaps these are the earliest forms of language that we know about. These are symbols and they mean something. And they mean like something abstract and specific. Like, you know, it could be anything. It could be survival related. It could be practical. It could be like, you know, go this distance and you'll find water, or this is the place to find this animal to eat. We have no idea. But I was thinking, if it is something really like practical or even mundane. I don't even know if we could go so far as to say any of these could ever be mundane, but not something like sort of reaching through time to the future to connect with someone, not something that is meaningful in that way. Does that somehow take away my sense of feeling like these images are meaningful to me? And it's something we can never know. In many ways, it's similar to looking out at the cosmos and wondering, these deep questions about our place, or is there some grand plan? Like, we will never know. We can't know. Um, I mean, if you know that we can know, then tell me. I would like to know. But
You would like to know, yeah. I guess I would
yeah, but
too.
I thought this is actually a good example of something so unquantifiable, and the context in which we place it might actually change the way we feel about how meaningful it is to us on a personal level. So yeah, something really different. If you're interested in cave paintings, I definitely recommend you look that up. That
No, they won't
article.
need to, because I'll put the information in the video description.
Perfect.
I'll put the
I
links.
don't.
I'll get the links from you and I'll put those in there so you can read. Although sometimes New Scientist articles you can't read. So we'll find something for us to put in there that you might be
Yeah,
able to access without the
but
paywall.
and then there are lots of images online actually of like these kinds of paintings, these like negative stencil paintings from different sites around the world. Um, but the figure in the New Science article was quite good in that it showed you what versions of the hand signals were seen. So, and you could see, like, you can do it yourself and hold your own hands up and think, yeah, like I can do that more easily in the air. Maybe it it was just like another layer. You can actually practice doing the thing um, that those people did. I think it was 40,000 years ago. They dated it. I don't know if it was how
There's a
accurately they were able to date it.
there's a it's a really good example. Completely, at first you think, oh, that's completely different from what we're speaking about, but actually, I think it actually gets to the heart of it, because you're saying 40,000 years ago. So I think they estimate that human language, spoken language, would have been, I don't know, 100,000 or so years ago. So a little bit before vocalizations, And I think it gets to the heart of, we've not defined what meaning is. And in a simple terms, meaning is giving a vocal sound that then represents something else. So that vocal sound, cow, means that animal over there with the black and white colors on it. And so language is a way of representing another thing with a code almost. But then cave paintings is like the next step where there's a visual representation, because if those hand symbols meant something and they have it's almost like a language potentially, and it sounds like a reasonable theory for this one. So what we're saying there is, you can see there the creativity. Humans, and this is something I said in the original illusion of meaning concept, this idea of humans are meaning constructing organisms rather than meaning finding. Now, again, that's going to be there'll be different perspectives on that. So like you say about trying to find those answers and wanting those answers, well, this is saying, well, what we're actually seeing is that humans have tried to create meanings, and they've had the utility and value, survival value, benefits to a community. And so when we create meanings, that's a deeply human thing. I think that's the other thing about looking at the history of meaning, language, pictorial representations. And you mentioned that written language would have come after this. Cave paintings, that would have been the next sort of development. And yeah, I just think that it's such a human thing, meaning. So I think sometimes if we're too scientistic and we want to sort of, in a way, denigrate human search for meaning or different meaning models, we overlook something really very human, maybe the most human thing that there is. And these cave paintings show that at such an early time, and that's what's really impactful about seeing them. And I agree with you, that idea of like having known from your description that they draw around the hand like that, and just thinking that you're seeing that cast of that person's actual hand, a connection to that person who lived 40,000 years ago. It's kind of beautiful and melancholic and kind of sad and lovely all at the same time, I think. I don't know if
Yeah.
that you agree.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Um, and actually what you're saying about, I think sometimes people maybe don't consider, they maybe, I guess sometimes we might consider that we don't think about too much, or we don't value the meaning in something, but actually it's automatic. Like we just do. And then we look back on it and we think that if you ask someone what's meaningful to you, they can often pick out things, even though if they haven't actually like specifically sat down and thought about that particular question. But then on the flip side, there was actually um, YouTube, one of your YouTube commentators. I just pulled out their comment because I thought actually this is not a shared experience for everyone. So this person says, it's Sid Lawson, 3181, says, the idea that life needs a meaning never made sense to me. I feel like the meaning of this is just the life. And I thought about this because if someone says, oh, my life has no meaning, or I don't think life has meaning, that might feel quite pessimistic. And it might feel to that person pessimistic, but not necessarily. Like there are philosophies where people look at life and look at existence, and it's much more about living in the moment and letting go, to like hanging on to ideas that everything has to mean something. And it's the letting go of attachments that can free us to actually have more joy in the moment, which it feels maybe like counterintuitive, but there's definitely a huge philosophy around that. This person goes on to say, so I've cut his comment in half, goes on to say, it's the present moment and being present in it and getting all out of it that you can. I don't see why we act like this isn't enough. If anything, it's all too much on its own. So that's a completely different way of looking at it. And I just thought, yeah, that's an interesting counterpoint to everything that we're talking about.
I think I'm glad you brought that one in, because correctly, these kinds of discussions, the philosophy, the science, the academic intellectualization of human experience, understandably and with some merit, people can attack that and say, no, like, go out into the world. That's not how people are living their lives. This is, it's overly intellectualized in some way. So I think I'm really glad that you brought that in. And then there was another comment similar to that, which said about how there is just this innate knowing of meaningful things in life. You don't wake up and go, right, should my relationship with my partner be meaningful or not?
Yeah,
Should
it's
my
not a
walk
choice
with
you
my,
make.
no, because it's so ingrained in you. And again, there's a departure about how that would be explained. For many people, those are the kinds of experiences, those innate feelings that lead some people to believe in God. They see that as almost like an evidence of God. That's like
Yeah.
a truth, a preordained value that was instilled in something that you are then realizing in those moments. But yeah, I think it's a million great points in that really short comment. And then it goes into Buddhist ideas about presence and mindfulness and just
Yeah.
being in the moment of your life.
Yeah. And then there was another one, actually, a quote by David Gill one, that I thought was really interesting, because we've talked about a few different perspectives. We've talked about, you know, thinking about meaning deeply and what's meaningful to us, and also maybe just going through and just experiencing it, but not necessarily thinking about it. And then we've also got people that say, yeah, I've thought about it, and it's actually, this is not something that I value or that I think is important to me. This is just, I just live in the moment, and this is not something that is important to me. And you've talked a little bit about how this kind of fits in with your perspective as an atheist. And I wanted to see if there's some common ground with some of the other commentators that have kind of come to different conclusions or are still exploring different ideas. And this one from David Gill really pointed out, I think, some good common ground. He says that essentially, while the search for meaning can lead to religion, you can also find things that are just deeply uniting. So I haven't taken his whole quote, but this is just part of it. He said, I choose to live my life by the maxim taught by Jesus that insofar as you did unto one of the least, you did it unto me. It means that I live my life as though God is love, and as though the very meaning of life is love. In learning how to love, I therefore discover in practice the meaning of life. I feel a greater kinship to the atheist whose only God is love than to theists who don't regard love as the essence of who God is, of whom it seems there are many. But the reason I am Christian is that I see in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, as recorded in the Bible, the clearest example and display of love that I have ever encountered anywhere. I wish you fruitfulness in your quest for meaning, the meaning of existence as you seek it in this realm of human experience. And I thought, oh, okay, like we're talking about an internal sense that we value love and it is meaningful in its own right. And this person has used that as part of his reasoning for also believing in a higher being. But actually, we may all have, many people may, like religious or not, may have that shared fundamental meaningful experience that kind of equates to a value. And so I just thought it was a really nice perspective that we've taken the same thing, essentially, the same lived experience, and potentially come to different conclusions by thinking on it deeply. So it's not necessarily that people have had different experiences. I guess that's what I'm saying. It's not that a person thinks a certain way because their life has been like they've had an experience that you didn't have. It's that they're doing something different with the same very human experience.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think it sounds quite similar that David, his idea of love, and love is a word that really not just captures connection, but it's a really positive framing of connection. And that's what you said at the start, that connections, human connections, and the value you got from teaching, working with kids and stuff. And I would say, for me, when I was doing science, and we said before, science can be really frustrating. And it's hard to see the value, because if you repeat something over and over again and there's something wrong with the media you're growing it in, there's all these annoying setbacks and technical issues. And what I found was I was doing a whole day's work and thinking, right, I've got nothing to show for that. I mean, it just was a technical issue of no interest. There are things that come up that actually end up being really interesting that you didn't expect,
Yeah.
that maybe would have thought were wrong. But no, this is just crap, to be honest. But I found that when I was working with students, if I felt like I could help them in any way feel better or more, even just calmer about something, reassure, or help them do something they've not done before, save them some time because I've done it myself already and I can show them the shortcut how to do something on the computer. I felt like that was value that I could stand by. So I was able to get value that I would say was irrefutable, whereas the experiments were hit and miss whether there would be any value from some days in the actual practical lab. But the stuff with the human connection was for me, was absolutely valuable. There was no question of it.
Yeah, I feel for you. So I've spent a lot. I remember working in a lab and for me, it was the tubing. I was purifying this protein and the tube and you'd lose the protein that you'd been purifying for like weeks and it would just break and it would just leak. I'm like, no, you're like you can easily lose a whole week or 2 weeks worth of work through just like a little thing coming untouched. Yeah, just.
Let's be honest, it was a waste of time. Unfortunately, horrible experience. Wow, that was lovely, and I really loved David's positive comment. I was on Medium, another publication platform, does like articles and stuff, and it was a religious person. And I think the argument they were making in the article was that atheists were, yeah, it was something about the faith an atheist has to believing nothing, that type of thing. Trying to make an equivalence between atheism as a belief system as equivalent to believing in God. And I don't think it's as simple as that. But it was quite a nuanced article. And I just messaged the guy on the comments and I just says, look, I gave my disagreement, but I just says, look, but if you're going to take your faith and use it in the way David Gill has described there in his comment and do positive things and have wonderful connections, then good for you. And I'll try and do the same with my atheism. And I thought that was just the whole point in life. I mean, I think sometimes science can feel like it denigrates the human experience with these humanity decentering moments. But and sometimes it can lead us to think, well, we're not that important. And then you start to denigrate the human experience. But I think that's all each of us ever has at the end of the day. And the quality of that is so important, the quality of our human experience. And I'm starting to see things now as things in life, relationships, experiences, things I do. Do they bring meaning to life or do they detract from it? Does a job or career bring meaning or detract? So, for example, we talked about the structure of scientific research in academia. So much about that structure and the way it works actually takes away the opportunity for a meaningful life for those people because it makes it harder to have a family, or the insecurity of it causes stress, so they can't enjoy the job itself. That's what Jean-Paul Sartre said about the idea that we create meaning. So he's an atheistic existential philosopher. His idea is we create meaning, but he described it as a terrifying freedom. And I think it's a terrifying freedom in some ways, but it's also like a opportunity as well. It's an opportunity. It's also a responsibility too. It's an interesting way to think of ethics, because when you realize how important someone's internal human experience is, it becomes incredibly important that you respect the other person's human experience. Like how important it is not to take away the framework someone has for meaning in their life. Like that becomes potentially a very harmful thing to do, or even just to not respect it. I think we just need to respect the human and respect the value of the human experience. I'm not saying that some of the militant atheists aren't aware of that. It's just that they emphasize different points to the point where that maybe isn't the strongest thing that comes out of what they say. You will find these concessions, you will find these points being made to some extent, but the emphasis is wrong. I actually think that might be the core emphasis of what we're trying to do here. That might be the most important bit of it. I spoke in another video about this idea that Stephen Jay Gould, the evolutionary biologist, had of non-overlapping magisteria. I think I might have mentioned it in the original video, but anyway. And it was this idea that science and religion occupy different fields entirely. They attend to different aspects of reality. To an extent, that's true. And there's ways they should be non-overlapping. But that's a bit convenient. The reality is they do overlap. And for me, I would like to think that even if you're religious, you will still find something interesting about learning about the origin of life on Earth, learning about the history of life, knowing that life has existed for 4 billion years, knowing how the atoms were forged in stars and how that's the matter that makes up each of us and how we've evolved over time. And then the origins of the universe before that and how the cosmos has evolved to create things like us that can reflect, configurations of matter that can reflect on the fact that they are a configuration of matter and what that means, is quite an unbelievable, mind-blowing thing. So actually they do overlap. We talk about God and we are talking about the nature of reality when we look at the origins of life and the nature of the universe. Unfortunately, we can't avoid that. Saying they're non-overlapping would solve some problems, like preventing pseudoscientific religious beliefs from getting into the school classroom, which is important to avoid. But actually, they are overlapping at times. That's just unavoidable.
Interesting as well would be to look at if there are people who have had big changes in the way that they view meaning as a result of scientific discovery, or as a result of something else. Because I think like the context and all of that, like that would be interesting to see like what it was. Because if we say assigning meaning to something is kind of an involuntary thing to some extent, you can't help but find something meaningful, then it's just interesting to think like, how could that change and what could change it either way? Like, can things lose meaning and gain meaning as we learn more about the nature of human experience and also about the universe more widely as well? If anyone wants to comment and share something like that, that would be a really interesting one, to detailed and thought-provoking. There were so many good
really
comments.
Really deep, thoughtful reflections. I kind of made that point in the video. I was like, let's make this a bit different from some of the other comments feeds that you can get on the internet. And wow, I mean, some of them, I think some of you guys should consider publishing a little mini article with your comment, because there's loads of great points and it's written really well. If you fancy writing something at some point, I think Dan recommended did that. I said in my reply, I thought you wrote something so lovely. I think you should consider writing it up as an actual thing. And yeah, that idea of faith deconstruction, the idea of believing in something and then coming to the conclusion that you don't believe it anymore or something changes, would be interesting to hear about if someone wanted to share it. So there is David Black on Substack who did talk about some of those themes in his comments on the article, going through a process of having a religious belief system and then not having it anymore. And he talks about some of the emotional things that came up through that whole process, and it's quite fascinating. So, David, if you're watching this one, feel free to put a comment below, because then maybe you could convey some of your experiences. I'm sure other people have had the same thing. There's a creator called No Nonsense Spirituality. Have you seen Britt Hartley, No Nonsense Spirituality? She's fantastic.
No.
She's an atheist now, but she was religious, a Mormon, I think. But she now works with people as a sort of therapist, working on the concept of faith deconstruction and then rebuilding meaning in someone's life. And so there's this idea that she helps people rebuild and find meaning after losing it, because I think to have a sort of framework and then lose it is a different experience from never really having a framework and just kind of making your way. And fully acknowledge, as we said earlier, some people just don't care and they're absolutely fine. And this is all academic and they don't worry about these things. Actually, I was going to say, Maria, I also had a little story to tell you. I wanted to look at, so thank you very much for cave paintings. And I tried to come up with something different as well. So the thing that I found that I thought of was really interesting. So there's a philosopher. Now he's before Albert Camus. And remember Albert Camus, his idea is the absurd, this confrontation of human consciousness with a universe that's impersonal or silent in terms of meaning. It doesn't give the answers, and this is a thing we've talked about quite a bit today. So you don't find those answers. Now, I think it's about 10 years before Camus, there's a Norwegian philosopher called Peter Wessel Zapffe. Now, most people didn't really discuss him extensively in wider philosophical circles because he wrote in Norwegian and his work was only translated pretty recently. And even more recent that a book was written about his work has kind of popularized it and brought it into people's thoughts. So his work kind of went a bit unnoticed and people are getting quite excited about it now. He wrote an essay called The Last Messiah, and it's already a great name for an essay. The concept of the last Messiah. Okay. There's this deer in historical times. They've got paleological evidence of it. It was called an Irish elk, but apparently that's like, it wasn't an elk and it wasn't Irish, so they think the name's not very good. But it had gigantic antlers. And so he talked about the fact that the giant antlers, maybe they were for sexual selection or for like rucks or something. There wasn't like a individual survival value as such in terms of the antlers. They were kind of for display and something. So these enormous antlers, but they became extinct, this organism. And so for him, in The Last Messiah, he talks about the very last of this species, the last individual. So there was something quite poignant for him about thinking about this extinction event in this last individual, whose antlers were so big that they had become unsupportable when things changed. And so these antlers just caused the extinction of this deer. Now for him, he sees human consciousness like those antlers. It's this kind of idea that human consciousness has evolved to build communities for these cave paintings in language and in written word. They've allowed us to maybe locate food. They've allowed us to do maybe basic calculations to work out food stocks to last over periods of time. There's utility to them, survival value. But his point is, yes, there's that survival value in those circumstances of consciousness. But ultimately, like the antlers of the deer that are too big, he thinks our consciousness has over-evolved and allowed us to realize the terrifying nature of reality that we find ourselves in. Now, I don't agree with that point, but I think it's a wonderful way of putting it. What do you think of that, Maria? Have you heard that one before?
Terrifying. That is a terrifying
Sorry,
thought.
have I ruined your day?
Weighed down by our own conscious. Oh my god. Yeah, that's
Maybe not,
terrifying.
and maybe actually to extend the metaphor further, maybe you'll feel weighed down by this conversation and you won't agree to do another one. So hopefully not.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is to do with, to some extent, you can choose what to take from it, and you can, you know, there's good and bad that exist at the same time. So you can make a conscious choice to do more things that you find meaning in, even though you can't understand the whole universe. You probably won't get any good answers to your questions. You know, we may just go round in circles forever, but none of that necessarily matters, because living a good life, just doing the thing that feels meaningful for you, even though it's totally subjective and maybe nobody agrees with you, but if it's meaningful to you, then when you come to the end of your, you know, when you're old and you look back at your life, will you think that was a life well lived? And maybe that's the takeaway, that the conscious choices that we do have, because we can't necessarily choose where we fall in terms of, like, we can't choose how to think, but we can choose what to focus on. So maybe that's like the good that comes of it. I mean, I definitely don't want to like look at human consciousness that way. So maybe I'm just blindly ignoring which is something that people have spoken about. Like, you know, you can just, so one of the commenters said, you know, you can just like put it on mute, that sense of being completely overwhelmed by the questions. But I think a better way of dealing with something which is actually an impossible situation is to just decide to change and do what you can do, which is where to direct your focus and what you can actually do. And even though we can't really understand it, we might still have an amazing, meaningful life
Exactly.
because
And
of the
again, that just
choices.
shows, and when you talk about that meaningful life, it's all about that human experience again, isn't it? It's the value of that's all we have.
Yeah.
And just to jump in, because I'm thinking of a few things as you were talking there, it was really good. So yeah, the idea of the mute button, or ignorance is bliss, or as Kurt Cobain said, I wish I was like you, easily amused. And for him, the lead singer of Nirvana, wrote some great songs. And I guess for him, it was just that idea of like, rather than chastising someone who can be joyfully not need to think about things in a deep way, he's actually saying, no, I wish I was able to do that. I would like a bit of that, and that would be a good thing. And also just to bring it back to what you're saying, right? If there is an impersonal universe, if there is equal weighting to a negative perspective and a positive one, then neither of them are scientifically more accurate. Then we actually do have an equal. We should probably move towards the positive one if we can. And it was another point, though, in the comments. I thought I'd made it. I made it in the original article. I might have not made it in the original video. But the comment was about how not everyone has sort of equal opportunity for meaning. It can seem like almost, when saying it's an opportunity or a responsibility, I think there's a number of things that can make meaning very, very difficult in life. And life can be really hard. So like chronic illness, all those things can make it incredibly difficult to live a meaningful life. Poverty, where you live in the world, it's not equal opportunity for meaning. So that's important. And the other thing to say is, so we're saying nihilism is the idea of a nothingness, that there isn't a good or a bad. There's no morals, there's no ethics. Those are all constructed. But then if there is no right and wrong, and we have the choice, we choose the thing that enriches our lives. So Peter Wessel Zapffe, the guy with the deer and the antlers, two things to say. Apparently the biological accuracy of the deer story isn't quite right. Not that that matters. It's just a sort of story. Apparently that big antlers might not have been an issue for the deer and why it got extinct at all. But he was a mountaineer. So that's quite a joyful pursuit. He was really into his mountaineering. So he spent a lot of times climbing mountains. And Albert Camus, his solution to that realization of an impersonal universe or a silent universe, and that there is inevitable suffering in human life, is a sort of triumphant defiance. Confront it as it is and embrace the suffering, a triumphant defiance. So that was his way of giving what you mentioned before, giving an answer. If there is no answer, giving an answer, I guess a practical answer rather than a metaphysical answer about the nature of reality, a practical answer. But the thing I want to emphasize about Camus, the language can still be quite negative, and I think he was quite scornful of science at times as well. And at that time, remember, they were just starting to think of things like the vacuum of space. So the concept of a nothingness was becoming kind of like instantiated in reality. Now, the vacuum of space isn't a nothingness, and there's more to say about the physics of that. But it was at least a confrontation to think about this vacuum, that this was all happening at that time. So people were starting to feel like science was uncovering a reality that needed to be processed emotionally. But Albert Camus, he never really knew his father because his father died in World War I. Then Camus got tuberculosis, which left him with chronic illness. Then during World War II, he went to France because he wanted to fight against the Nazis that were about to invade. But because of his tuberculosis, he wasn't allowed to fight because of his health. It wasn't suitable. So when you think about that perspective, whether it takes that dark, negative perspective. You've sometimes got to look at the individual that's making the case, although it might be intellectualized, philosophical, it might be academic and, logical, at least on the page. There's a person there writing it. And again, you've got to think about the person writing it. World War I and II, because of the technological advancements of the Industrial Revolution, brought a level and scale of suffering that the world has never seen. Millions and millions. And Camus' life is dictated by World War I and II. He straddles both. How could you come away from that with anything other than some dark emotions towards the world that you're in? And a lot of actually some of the wording in the book, The Myth of Sisyphus, where he talks about the absurd, there's a great passage which kind of captures the mundane monotony of life. It's like get up at 4 a.m, work in a factory for 12 hours, go home, go to sleep. He does it in a quite a creative way. He emphasizes the repetitiveness in the way he writes it. So there's a lot of things going on there. Now we don't, and again, this is the thing about the responsibility for constructing meaning. Because if we think of our political systems and the way that our modern world is set up, are we making it possible for people to have meaningful lives, or are we actually making it harder? I think that ultimately meaning should take more of a weight when we're thinking about everything about the world that we live in and the lives that we inhabit. I think it's actually, so aside from, I do understand the point about, we don't even need to think about meaning. Maybe to some extent that person has already got quite a good predisposition, Maybe they've got things okay, possibly. I think all life has a lot of hardships. I don't want to make any assumptions, but maybe that is that inequality in access to meaning. Maybe that's exactly why we do need to think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting you saying about Camus having such a hard life and choosing to kind of confront those questions and still having that defiance. Like that's a kind of a positive outcome to a very negative situation for the individual. Yeah, it's very true. Like not everyone does have access to that kind of thing, and even the time and the opportunity, and if your headspace is just filled with like I have got to get XYZ done, in this period of time, just even like that freedom, that time, like time is a resource as well. So yeah.
Yeah, because if you start thinking about being in a rush or this needs to be done by then, it starts to drain all meaning out of the process of the thing you're doing. It becomes something that just needs to it needs to be over now. I need to be in the past. It's a really negative frame to be in. And so you mentioned before, we spoke a lot about the research culture, but those kinds of negative structures end up meaning that you don't find any value in your accomplishments. It's the next thing. So, yeah.
And you can feel forced into that situation where you mentioned earlier, like you can take an image, first draft, put it into AI, and then out comes the finished image. And you can make that artwork 10 times faster. You get 10 times the images. You lose the process of doing it, which is maybe the thing that is meaningful to you. But that puts bread on the table because now your output is so high that you can make more money, which is what you need. People have needs first, and they need to do certain things to get by. So in a way, having the time to explore and to do these things that are meaningful, it's not always available. But it's interesting as well, actually, because we've sort of talked around it a little bit, the idea that like things can be very, like the separation between what is valuable and what is meaningful. Like something could be really meaningful, but actually be a horrible experience. But in some way that event or that experience or that situation, like it still holds a level of meaning. It's different. Like when I think about meaning, I automatically think about what I value, what, I conflate it with morals, I conflate it with like feelings, perspective, priorities. All these things are like tied to me to what is meaningful. But I think you talking about just the essence of like something is meaningful if it conveys something. If it conveys something to you through time from the past, is meaningful. If it was an event, if it conveys a concept through an image or a word, it's meaningful. Like that's actually that broadens out what we're talking about when we talk about meaning.
And a valuable representation
And that's something I find hard with.
representation would be like one of those pictures on the cave painting. It would be, it's meaningful because it represents something, but it's valuable if it represents something that could be of use, like food or something, a source of food or hunting expertise. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, or even if it makes us feel happy, like we have a memory that was meaningful to us, but it makes us feel happy. But we can also have a memory that's a horrible thing to remember, but it still has deep meaning to us. And so I think that's probably like where I'm coming into it, is that's something that I hadn't really considered deeply before I started thinking about this.
There's a great point.
And also you can value something, but it's not meaningful as well. So like the definitions, I think it can be easy to kind of like get a little bit lost in the terminology.
And I think that was probably why I tried to keep it at arm's length a little bit in the original article with meaning. But one of something that really strikes me with what you're saying there is some of the important work on meaning in philosophy. So if you're interested in like meaning of life and how you construct meanings and what's meaningful or valuable, I'll put a link again in the description to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which captures all the work that philosophers have done on this space. They've actually done loads. But one of the key experiments in all of that is the experience machine. And this is a thought experiment. The idea is you go into a machine and you just get these blissful, joyful experiences. So they would be artificially generated. It would be the best thing ever. So you'd be sitting in this for the rest of your life. And the point is that most people think that sounds awful. So it's the point about how positive, happy, pleasant experiences can actually, in their purest form, carry no meaning, and people aren't really interested, because that talks to the bit you were adding, which is that meaningful things can be very hard. I think human connection, deep human connection, often comes from the worst of circumstances in life. The beauty in human connection is more poignant and closer from hardship. It can also come from joyful experiences, but I think hardship even more so. So yeah, the experience machine as a thought experiment was a great way of kind of saying that actually people are interested in meaningful experiences. They'd probably be more interested in earning something or even trying to earn something and being unsuccessful than just sitting in a blissful state. That seems just like a waste of time. Now, people have expanded and elaborated upon the experience machine. They've turned it upside down and done other thought experiments that have different insights. So by all means, check out the links that I'll put in. But yeah, I just thought that might be interesting when we think about meaning, value, positive, blissful experiences, and all those other things.
Yeah. Based on your original article on the illusion of meaning, you then did a follow-up video where you discussed these ideas in a bit more sort of depth. One of the comments on that YouTube video by user Nephalangio, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, they summed up the overall message of both the article and the video. So I thought I'd read this one out. And this also kind of helped me with my kind of overall understanding as well. So they said, this is a Stanley Kubrick quote that they've put: "The most terrifying fact of the universe is not that it is hostile, but that it is indifferent. But if we come to terms with this indifference and accept the challenges of life within the boundaries of death, however mutable man may be able to make them, our existence as a species can have genuine meaning and fulfillment. However vast the darkness, we must apply our own light. I thought that was a lovely way of saying we find our own meaning. Either we find it or we make it, but
It's
either way, we supply
beautiful.
our own light.
Yes, that's true. It can kind of be a bit more all-encompassing. I just think that quote is just the best quote I've ever heard, and so beautifully written.
Yeah.
So beautiful. It beautifully sums up everything. Yeah, I think that's a great place to end it, actually, Maria, because I just love that quote. And thanks to everyone that's commented. Please comment on this video. We've talked about different themes again. Any of your ideas, if you do feel comfortable sharing your personal experiences of faith deconstruction or atheism or nihilism or a belief in God or some other grand narrative to the universe. I keep saying God, but there are different ideas, some ideas of panpsychism, pantheism, that give a different sort of story about reality that maybe isn't the same as a traditional God as we would imagine it. I'm working on another article at the moment, which is going to be called The Atheist Guide to Meaning and Purpose. So I suppose I should probably work on my definitions finally of what meaning is and what purpose is and how they differ. But I'm really looking forward to that. There's some interesting things going to be in there. I spoke to an existential psychotherapist, and let's see what they said about, finding meaning and stuff. So I'm going to talk a bit about that too. Yes, Maria, thank you so much for joining me. It was great to have you and have you sharing your perspectives. And I hope we can do it again. Putting
Yeah.
you on the spot here, I'd love to do another conversation if that's okay at some point.
Yeah, it's been really fun. It's been really fun to look into all these ideas that I haven't like I haven't never really taken the time to kind of dive into these more deeply in this way. So yeah, it's been really fun, and I think that article will definitely be an interesting read. I mean, my first question to you was like, what do you mean by meaning? you know, and it's good fun to kind of think about these things, and it can also, I think, it's actually probably helped me a little bit with just like reviewing my life at the moment because I think sometimes we can just go through the motions of life, get so stuck in our repeated patterns, our routines. It's nice to take a step away from that and just think about what is meaningful to me and what do I want to be doing with my time, within the boundaries of what I can do, which is a big thing, but like what avenues are open, and what am I going to carry on doing? So yeah, it's good fun. I think it's useful as well. So yeah, look forward to your article, and hopefully we'll have another chat.
Yeah, you're
At some
totally
point
right.
soon.
So much of what we of the things we do, they're just automatic. We don't even think about if they're serving us or not. So it can be good to just reflect on that and take stock of that. But I found, for example, this conversation to be incredibly meaningful that we've had today. And thank you so much for your insights and bringing your own personal reactions and feelings to concepts that we're discussing. And yeah, hopefully the people watching as well will also find it meaningful, and then we'll have had some value to someone's day, hopefully.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Now, just one thing I wish I had said in the original conversation, and that's the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic meaning. This was a point that a lot of people had made on the original video, and I think it's a good one. So in this context, intrinsic meaning is something that comes from within, whereas extrinsic meaning comes from an external source. Now, the famous example of this would be if the cosmos itself has a grand narrative behind it. And again, the version of this that you've maybe heard of would be a traditional God, a creator, a reason for everything. Now, one of the points I make in The Illusion of Meaning is the fact that we are the universe in terms of the matter that makes us up. And so, whereas the intrinsic source of meaning, as in the personal one derived from within, from our beliefs, from our personal opinions and our experiences, has it sometimes been derided or denigrated by some hyper-rationalistic thinkers. However, if we are the universe, then this intrinsic meaning is indeed a cosmological meaning. Although it's not a grand narrative to the cosmos itself, it's a distinctly terrestrial and personal source of meaning. Anyway, I just wanted to clear that up. Now,